Hello everyone, thank you for attending my presentation. My name is Andreas Michael. I'm with Cipriana Petroleum Technology, and the title of my speech is Geomechanical Implication of Reservoir Depletion Regarding Post-Blowout Well Capping, a Gulf of Mexico case study. My paper number is 205878, and I highly encourage everyone to go to OnePetro, download and read that paper because it contains a lot more information on many more subtopics than what I can touch on in this 20-minute presentation today. Loss of well control presents the greatest challenge regarding wellbore integrity during the life cycle of a well. This is because during post-blowout discharge, the wellbore pressure is extremely low, and that is followed by a period of wellbore pressure buildup during the subsequent capping procedures. This brings the danger of casing failure during post-blowout discharge, fracture initiation from the wellbore walls during capping, and in the unlucky case of the fractures propagating all the way to the seafloor, potential hydrocarbon broaching. On the right side, we see a schematic from Union Oil's 1969 A21, as it was called, well blowout in Santa Barbara Channel in California. During capping procedures back then, the fractures that were initiated propagated all the way to the seafloor, as we see here, providing a migration pathway for hydrocarbons to get into the seawater from the reservoir, causing a massive ecologic disaster, the economic, technical, and political effects of which are still strongly felt today in the state of California. Now, a few words on a basic geomechanics background that is necessary to understand what I'm doing in this study. The first one is the stresses on the wellbore radius, which will determine wellbore integrity ultimately. When we drill a wellbore, we disturb the stress field surrounding it in a way that the pre-existing, what we call the in situ principal stresses, those are the vertical SV, and the horizontal SH max and SH mean, SH max always bigger or equal to SH mean, are no longer dominant in this near wellbore vicinity. Instead, we have a set of three new stresses which act in cylindrical coordinates and dominate this near wellbore region. Those are the blue axial stress, sigma ZZ, the red tangential stress, also known as hoop stress, sigma theta theta, and the green radial stress, sigma RR, all acting in the configuration which I show here on the wellbore radius. Blue for axial, red for tangential, green for radial. Now, when we have tensile fracture initiation from the wellbore walls, which is what we are focusing on in this study, the most common type of fracture initiation is what we call longitudinal fracture initiation, and is displayed by the red fracture on the right of this schematic. This occurs when the tangential stress on the wellbore radius becomes more tensile than the tensile stress of the rock, symbolized by the capital letter T. And when this takes place, a fracture initiates axially with respect to the wellbore axis. A less common transverse fracture initiation occurs when the axial stress on the wellbore radius becomes more tensile than the tensile stress of the rock, and the fracture initiates orthogonally with respect to the axis of the wellbore. The range of stress states that can occur in the Earth's subsurface can be visualized in a very simple two-dimensional plot called the allowable stress state diagram, sometimes called MAP as well. This has SH max normalized by SV on the y-axis and SH mean normalized by SV on the x-axis. The dotted diagonal is the line of horizontal isotropy, where SH max is equal to SH mean, and the solid black lines are drawn using a specific value for friction factor to indicate the frictional limits. Any stress state outside those bounds is virtually unstable and cannot occur in their subsurface. Because if a fault exists under those stress state conditions, it will automatically fail in shear. There will be fault slippage, which is basically an earthquake. The solid thick black line indicates the frictional limits for friction factor equals to 0.6, and the frictional limit with the thinner solid line indicates it's for friction factor equals to 0.8. Now, if I take this plot and add two lines to it, the red line for the stress states for which the tangential stress on the wellbore radius is equal to 0, and the blue line for the stress states for which the axial stress on the wellbore radius is equal to 0, the yellow region behind either of both of those two lines, indicates the range of stress states where tensile fracture initiation, either longitudinal or transverse, will take place at the given conditions of port pressure, wellbore pressure, and other geomechanical parameters like Poisson ratio, etc. In this case, the port pressure is 0.433 psi per foot, which is the hydrostatic pressure gradient, and is equal to the wellbore pressure, so balanced drilling. For this simple example case. Now, in order to visualize the geomechanic effects that occur during post-blowout discharge, we need to divide our thought into three different compartments. And first of all, we need to ask what happens during post-blowout discharge. Now, you have blown the well. Reservoir fluids are spewing through the wellbore to the surface or the seafloor. It's a Hail Mary situation. But what happens in the reservoir? And the answer is here, reservoir depletion. The pore pressure of the reservoir is going down. The first effect of that is fairly simple, and that is increasing the stability to shear slippage of pre-existing faults. And that is the polygon I mentioned in the previous slide, which shows the frictional limits at a given friction factor increases. And this is because the pore pressure goes down. So more stress states become stable at the given conditions. Secondly, we have a decrease in the horizontal in situ principal stresses. Those are the SH max and the SH mean because of the depletion. So we have a movement of our stress state of interest, which is at the wellbore, obviously, downwards and to the left, as we see by the dotted green arrow, from the solid purple circle to the hollow, the empty purple sector. This moves you towards the fracture initiation lines. However, these fracture initiation lines will also be affected by reservoir depletion, and that what happens is that the fracture initiation pressures increase. That means the blue line and the red line indicate indicating respectively the transverse and longitudinal fracture initiation limits, they both shift to the left, away from the stress state. Now, these three different effects, and particularly the latter two, can be competing. So every problem is really a case by case, but there are some commonalities that can help us create a collective contingency planning mentality when it comes to such terrible situations. Now, in this paper, I did a case study on the M56 reservoir. After the events of 2010, it became famous as the Macondo Reservoir, using information that I found from other people who did work before me on that specific case study. So what we see here is the two fracture initiation lines, transverse and longitudinal, and we see how they vary during the two stages of loss of well control: post-blowout discharge and post-blowout well capping. And as we see with the purple arrow, during post-blowout discharge, both fracture initiation pressures increase, and then during well capping, they start decreasing, but they don't go back to where they were. So the resultant, the net effect on fracture initiation pressures during loss of well control is making fracture initiation pressures at least slightly higher. And for this case, as is the case for most deep wells, longitudinal fracture initiation exhibits a lower initiation pressure than transverse fracture initiation. So it's easier to create longitudinal fracture initiation than transverse. This is the case with deep wells, but in some shallow wells, it's a different story. And the Santa Barbara 1969 case is actually one of those rare examples where transverse fracture initiation was the one that caused the disaster. And here we have a diagram showing the variation of the wellbore pressure during the 20 days from the blowout until about 140 days after the blowout. So before the blowout, there is nothing special going on. Wellbore pressure is steady because it's balancing out the pore pressure. Then you have the blowout. Fluids are spewing from the well. That means the pressure is decreasing. And the pore pressure surrounding the reservoir is also decreasing. And it keeps decreasing until day 87 or 83. I think it was day 87. Some people have it wrongly as 83. It's always confusing. Very confusing when I was doing Pedron. And when you have capping that took place, the pressure builds up, and then it starts increasing until what I call here PWS max. And you are hoping that at no point during this wellbore pressure buildup, any of the two fracture initiation pressures, longitudinal or transverse, are exceeded. Now, I fit an analytical model through that, and I did my sensitivity studies to see how the post-blowout discharge period, which I symbolize by T sub P after Horner, and QDIS, which is the post-blowout discharge flow rate, would impact the resultant pressure buildup or the shut-in wellbore pressure, as we see here by PWS. And as we see, the higher the TP T sub P, which is the post-blowout discharge period, the lower the pressure built up will be, and vice versa. And then also, the higher the post-blowout discharge flow rate is, again, the lower the pressure built up at any given point. And the reason is very simple, is because of material balance. If you let the reservoir discharge longer or discharge at a much higher rate, more fluids are lost from the reservoir and they are less left behind to make the pressure get higher. Also, that's the bad thing, what I said. But the good thing is that if you are smart, you can use reservoir depletion on your benefit to predict and prevent fracture initiation, which is what my study is about. Because well capping is not always an abrupt single-step procedure. Now, when you install the capping stack on the broken blowout preventer and then you shut it in, depending on your capabilities, depending on the situation and the capping stack specifications, you're able to apply where the shutting occurs in a predetermined number of steps at over a specific time duration. And when this takes place, because some discharge takes place between those steps or during those steps until it's fully shut, you are able to prevent the wellbore pressure from building up too much. Of course, it doesn't stop, it mitigates the ecologic disaster, it doesn't stop it, but you can, in this way, keep the post-blowout capping pressure buildup from getting above the fracture initiation pressures. And the most nice thing is that if you are really smart, you can use the post-blowout discharge period and flow rate, and particularly the latter, to determine in advance a well capping strategy to prevent such a bad event like fracture initiation from taking place. And and if you are the smartest of all, you are going to do that before you even start drilling the well. So you have a contingency plan already in place. Now, in a paper that came out with Drilling and Completions, a journal paper a year ago, I came up with this critical discharge flow rate quantity, and that was a minimum limit for safe well capping. That means if your flow rate following discharge, post-blowout discharge flow rate is below that value, Q crit, you will have fracture initiation when you try to cap the well. If you are above that, you will be fine. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but not if you think about it in a material balance way. Again, it varies with T sub P and Q dis, and if negative value, that means you have zero risk of fracturing. And for the case of Macondo, it always stays below below zero. Now, it can go above zero and still be okay, as long as your real post-blowout discharge flow rate is above that. Now, the Macondo, it was a real example. And I couldn't manipulate the numbers. It's like, this is how it came. If you go to this paper here, 199673 I mentioned earlier, you will find a nice hypothetical scenario where it shows the variation in a much better way. And of course, like I said before, critical discharge flow rates can be calculated way before even you start drilling the well, and they can be compared with what is known as WCD, or worst case discharge estimations, which are mandated by the law, and hence establish a contingency plan before you start drilling the well. Now, in conclusion, reservoir depletion imposes 3 different geomechanical impacts. Some of those can be competing with each other. Depletion, being proportional to larger hydrocarbon discharge volume, enables incremental or multi-step capping stack shut-in schedules to be tailored to specific blowout scenarios. The likelihood of tensile fracture initiation is quantified by the concept of critical discharge flow rate, which is not a new concept. And you can always compare the discharge flow rates, the post-blowout discharge flow rates, with WCD estimations, and the critical discharge flow rates with post-blowout discharge flow rates from WCD estimations, and come up with a nice contingency plan. And a case study performed for the Macondo Reservoir showed no issue about fracture initiation, and it yielded always negative critical discharge flow rates. And with that, thank you very much. It's a lot of items. Please read the paper because it has much more information, is more elaborate. Thank you, and go Tigers.